Hollywood is often shrouded in a perfect aura, where appearance can determine destiny, and weight can sometimes become an obsession more terrifying than failure itself. But is that pressure truly related to the shocking murder of Nick Reiner? Or is it just a small piece of a darker picture, where fame, control, and hidden secrets push people to their limits? Before jumping to conclusions, let's delve into this story, detail by detail, to see how Hollywood contributed to this tragedy. If you find this content thought-provoking, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to continue following insightful analyses and previously untold revelations. Rob and Michelle Reiner are dead. They are truly dead. They were murdered in their own beds, in what was supposed to be their safest home. Yet Nick Reiner still believed he was the victim. He believed he was being held captive as part of a conspiracy, that he shouldn't be in prison. Tonight's breaking news has shocked the public. The double murder case against Nick Reiner stems from an obsession with appearance and weight in Hollywood. 2 lives lost, forever deprived of the chance to live with their children and grandchildren, their future gone, their presence lost from this world. And the question remains, what caused Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths? Did it all begin with a fear of weight gain in a ruthless industry? That moment is believed to have triggered the entire tragedy. Good evening. This is Nancy Grace. Thank you for watching. Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner were brutally murdered in their bedroom, in the very home they trusted completely. This is beyond imagination, beyond anyone's ability to accept. We believe the jury will ultimately find Nick Reiner guilty of murdering his parents, Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, and will reach a unanimous verdict. Thank you. Sources indicate that Nick Reiner believes he was the victim of a conspiracy after his parents' deaths. He admitted to causing their deaths, but doesn't understand why he's in prison. In Nick's mind, everyone is against him. Some sources suggest Nick might choose a not guilty plea on the grounds of mental illness, blaming his unstable mental health on medication. Indeed, Nick Reiner is currently being held on charges of the double murder of his parents. But what's shocking is that, in his perception, he believed he was the victim. Frankly, that's baffling. How could things be reversed to this extent? We invited Dr. Bethany Marshall, a renowned psychoanalyst and author of the book Deal Breaker, to join the analysis. She works in this legal area, appearing on Peacock and at drbethanymarshall.com. The question is, why would someone who caused the death of their parents believe they were victims of a conspiracy? They were dead. There were signs of resistance. Yet he still thought he was being framed. And after our discussion with Dr. Bethany Marshall, we will move on to the opinion of defense attorney Josh Cowell, because I believe the defense is deliberately releasing this information to influence public opinion and undermine the jury's morale. So, Dr. Bethany, what led Nick Reiner to portray himself as a victim? In your opinion, there are 2 possibilities. One is that he abused drugs for such a long time that it developed into a personality disorder, always tending to manipulate, blame others, and never take responsibility. The second possibility is that he may be under the influence of a form of drug-induced psychosis, leading to severe delusions. These delusions may have played a role in the murder of his parents. For example, the feeling that they were a threat or the embodiment of something dangerous, leading him to believe he had to act. And those distorted thoughts may still be haunting him even in custody. We continue our connection with Alexis Terzic, our crime investigative reporter, who was present in the courtroom following the developments of the first hearings. Alexis, many details are gradually being revealed, and I believe most of them are coming from the defense. Look, who is the only one who can access Nick Reiner right now? Only his lawyers. He's in solitary confinement, not allowed to contact other prisoners because the authorities are concerned for his safety, as well as the risk of self-harm. So who could he possibly talk to? The theories about mental illness, about schizophrenia, all come from the defense. They're trying to manipulate public opinion before the jury is officially formed. Alexis said that Nick Reiner's defense lawyer at the time she was in court was Alan Jackson, a very well-known name in the legal world, who has been involved in many major cases. He frankly stated that Nick was not guilty on mental grounds. The defense strategy was built on a series of circulating information. Nick had used antipsychotics, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and had been in and out of rehabilitation centers since he was 15. Now in his 30s, he had spent more than a decade and a half trapped in a cycle of treatment and relapse. His parents, according to records, had repeatedly tried to help their son overcome his addiction, find him a stable job, so he could earn his own income and not feel overshadowed by his famous father. But now, another detail has emerged. Nick is reportedly extremely worried about the medication he's using due to side effects that are causing him to gain weight. And once again, Nancy emphasizes that no one else has had contact with Nick besides his legal team. This makes the new information even more noteworthy. Dr. Bethany Marshall, there has been much discussion recently surrounding Nick Reiner's methamphetamine use. The question is, do professionals, from psychiatrists and medical experts to psychologists and psychoanalysts, agree that methamphetamine use can mimic the symptoms of schizophrenia? Her answer is that it is entirely plausible. When it comes to hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and sudden mood swings, it's easy to mistakenly assume they are manifestations of schizophrenia. But in reality, these symptoms can stem from many different causes. In this case, her first thought was methamphetamine. Upon hearing the whole story, methamphetamine immediately came to mind as a plausible explanation, as it can almost perfectly mimic the manifestations of schizophrenia, a disorder with both biological and genetic components. Furthermore, methamphetamine exacerbates the condition if someone already has schizophrenia. It makes symptoms much more intense and difficult to manage. Alternatively, if someone has latent schizophrenia, meaning the disease exists but hasn't manifested yet, methamphetamine use could be a trigger, causing the illness to flare up. Considering Nick Reiner's experience in numerous rehabilitation centers since he was 15, the picture becomes even more alarming. Schizophrenia typically begins in late adolescence or early adulthood. Therefore, it cannot be ruled out that the use of stimulants triggered an underlying disorder or produced symptoms very similar to the disease. According to Dr. Marshall, one way to differentiate is to observe the duration of symptoms after Nick was detained. If manifestations such as paranoia, hallucinations, and cognitive impairment persist for months even after drug use has ceased, then it is highly likely to be true schizophrenia. But if the symptoms subside relatively quickly, it is very likely a direct consequence of methamphetamine use. Some psychologists believe that methamphetamine-induced psychosis, especially at high doses, could very well be the primary cause. This condition is characterized by paranoia and hallucinations, and clinically, it is very difficult to distinguish from schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, often considered a thought disorder, also includes symptoms such as hallucinations and delusions, along with emotional depression, lack of motivation, social withdrawal, and poor communication. Studies show that a significant percentage of patients initially treated for methamphetamine-induced psychosis are later diagnosed with schizophrenia. This illustrates just how fragile the line between the two conditions is. In a previous podcast, Nick described his experience of being controlled by stimulants. He recounted being completely overwhelmed, staying awake for days on end, and beginning to vandalize everything around him in his guest house. From the television and lights to other objects, the outburst of control spread and was unstoppable. In the Dopey podcast, Nick Reiner candidly discussed his history of addiction, including heroin, marijuana, stimulants, tranquilizers, and methamphetamine. Those confessions, at this point, became particularly important. And from here, the discussion shifted to a legal perspective. Josh Crew, a veteran criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, and founder of the Cal's Law Office, was invited to participate in the analysis. When medicine, psychology, and law intersected, the question was no longer simply what Nick Reiner did, but what his mental state was when it all happened, and how that would be perceived in court. The reason precisely identifying the substance he used is crucial at this point is this. How can a mental disorder be invoked as a defense when that disorder is very likely a result of methamphetamine use or a methamphetamine-induced psychotic state? Because, as we both understand, voluntary use of alcohol or drugs is not considered a defense under the law. If his current mental disorder stems from methamphetamine, how can that be considered insanity in the legal sense when the cause is intentional substance abuse? This issue, in fact, is not unprecedented. Josh Cowell says he has directly handled similar cases, and California law does indeed account for this scenario. The deciding factor isn't whether he used drugs, but what was influencing his mental state on the day of the incident. Was it the direct effect of the drug, specifically methamphetamine, or an independent mental disorder like schizophrenia? These two factors can coexist. A person can suffer from both schizophrenia and drug use. But the crucial question the judge must consider when deciding whether to allow the insanity charge is, which factor played the dominant role at the time of the crime? If the results show methamphetamine was present in his system, and the use was voluntary in a sufficiently short period before the crime occurred, then the prosecution would have a very strong argument that the insanity defense is inapplicable. However, the defense is not without basis. They argue that Nick was in a psychotic state that he himself could not control. First, he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia beforehand. Second, the antipsychotic medication he was taking had just been changed. In medicine, this is considered a highly sensitive period, as medication is crucial in keeping the patient grounded. When medication is changed or imbalanced, the risk of disorder increases significantly. Third, and most importantly, consider what happened immediately after his arrest. Nick admitted to killing his parents, but didn't understand why he was in prison. He believed the entire incident was a conspiracy against him. According to the defense, this wasn't a denial of guilt, nor was it simply lying. It was a manifestation of someone unaware of the wrongfulness of their actions. And according to legal standards, the inability to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the crime is the core of the concept of mental insanity. However, Nancy Grace disagreed with that perspective. According to her, Nick's actions immediately after the murder showed the opposite. He knew very well that he had done something wrong. First, he left the scene. Next, he avoided his family and the police, forcing authorities to launch a large-scale manhunt. He deliberately avoided being caught, checking into a motel under his own name, but covering the windows with sheets so no one could see inside. These actions, according to Nancy, demonstrated a conscious attempt at avoidance and concealment, a sign of awareness of the legal consequences. And moreover, he knew his body was covered in blood, which further showed that he understood the seriousness of what had just happened. Inside the motel room, everything clearly revealed his awareness. Nick realized his body was covered in his parents' blood. He went into the bathroom, and the trail of blood behind him didn't lie. Then he showered, changed into clean clothes from head to toe. Clean shoes, clean shirt, clean pants, neatly washed hair. When he was done, he realized he was hungry and thirsty. In a completely calm state, he left the motel, went straight to a nearby 7-Eleven, chose a can of soda from the cold drinks section, patiently waited in line, and paid like any other customer. This wasn't unconscious panic. It was someone trying to hide, trying to escape. When the police appeared to arrest him, he didn't resist. No struggling, no shouting. He quietly raised his hands, completely silent. He knew exactly why he was being arrested. The video footage recorded by CBS News and the New York Post clearly showed that. For Nancy Grace, these images were enough to draw a clear line in any pretrial debate. Whatever the defense strategy might be later, the actions after the trial reflected control and perception. The program continued with special guest Rob Shooter, host of the podcast Naughty Naughty But Nice, and author of the best-selling book It Started With a Whisper. Shooter, a familiar figure in Hollywood PR, was invited to discuss how Nick Reiner viewed himself as a victim and what close sources revealed from behind bars. According to Shooter, Hollywood public opinion has undergone a dramatic shift. Previously, many people sympathized with Nick, his history of addiction and mental health issues. But as it became increasingly clear that the family would no longer be able to afford expensive legal teams and that he would likely have to rely on public defenders, Hollywood attitudes changed rapidly. Sympathy gave way to anger, and that anger was predicted to intensify as more information about Nick's mental state leaked out. Shooter said that, from what he'd heard, Nick was deeply immersed in distorted thoughts. He believed he would be released at a particularly personal time, coinciding with his father's birthday. That belief, according to Shooter, made many in the entertainment industry feel more uneasy than sympathetic. Nancy Grace immediately interrupted, emphasizing the line between street opinion and medical expertise. She bluntly asked Shooter that he wasn't a doctor, didn't have a medical degree, or specialized training in psychiatry. When Shooter said Nick was delusional, he was using the word in a colloquial sense, not as a medical diagnosis, because, according to Nancy, in a legal context, even a single misinterpretation could be interpreted as supporting a mental illness defense. Shooter agreed and clarified. He's not a psychologist, and he doesn't offer medical diagnoses. What he shared were feelings and rumors circulating in Hollywood. He'd spoken to stars, studio executives, and influencers, and they all shared the same view. Claims that Nick was the victim of a conspiracy sounded completely absurd, especially when juxtaposed with videos showing him still lucid enough to shower, change clothes, and cover up after the murder. In their eyes, there was no blindness or loss of control, just someone who knew what they had just done and was trying to escape the consequences. Okay, Rob Schuer, I want to try a line of reasoning I often use before juries. I've used it many times when refuting the defense's argument that a drunk driving murder is just an accident. There's no accident here. Every step is deliberate, the result of choice. The person turns off the car, goes into the bar, has the first drink, then the second, then the third, then gets the keys, pays, goes back to the car, inserts the key into the ignition, starts the engine, shifts gears and drives out onto the road. All are conscious actions. Now, let's apply that line of thinking to this case. After being accused of murdering his parents, he leaves the scene, leaves the room where they lay, leaves them there. When Romy, his sister, enters the house, Rob says, "I'm going to make you think about this, even if I don't like it." Romy enters the room and sees her father. She didn't even realize that her mother was also lying in bed, dead. In that moment, in her eyes, it was just a soiled pillow or a pile of disheveled sheets. What was she thinking? Did she think that her mother had tried to crawl to the end of the bed, pulling the blankets over herself to escape? Try putting yourself in that position. And then, think further. Why couldn't Romy immediately realize that her mother was lying next to her father? How had her body turned? How had it been hidden from view? What did he do afterward? He went to the storage shed by the pool, opened the closet, opened the drawers, gathered the clothes. Take out clean clothes. Pack carefully. Leave the house. Go to a motel. Check in. Show his ID. Get the key. Go to his room. Shower. Wash his hair. Change into clean clothes from head to toe. Even now, we don't even know where the blood-stained clothes went. Were they thrown away or hidden? And what about the murder weapon? Where is it? From what we know, the weapon hasn't been found yet. Did he dispose of it like in other sensational cases? Was he lucid and capable enough to do that? Think carefully. Then comes the very ordinary yet cold moment. He realizes he's hungry and thirsty. He walks to the convenience store. He goes in. He grabs a can of soda. He stands in line. He pays, completely calmly. He waits his turn. That's what's been recorded and confirmed by CBS sources. When you piece all these actions together, step by step, and I'm only talking in a simplified version, the picture becomes very clear. This is a series of deliberate, conscious, and controlled actions. People ask, as more and more information comes out, why do you keep mentioning Hollywood? Do you think the rest of the country actually cares what Hollywood thinks? I'm not sure. The only reason I care is because this is going to be a jury trial. And yes, that's exactly it. The people on the jury will be Californians, very likely people who live and work in Hollywood. That's the point. And as more and more details are revealed, the question you're asking is perfectly reasonable. How is this information being leaked? That's another issue to discuss. But the fact is, as details keep coming out, people are paying attention. This isn't a case where the public quickly turns their backs. In our world, Nancy, people are usually swept up in a news story very quickly. But that hasn't happened with the Rob Reiner case. People are still talking about him. Even at major events and entertainment gatherings, his name is still mentioned. He remains the center of attention. This shows that the level of interest is still very high, especially with the evidence and information being leaked to the press. But let me make one thing clear, Rob. First of all, I must clarify, this is not a story. This is the truth. I love my parents. I can't imagine walking into a room and finding both of them murdered in their own beds. They dedicated their lives to caring for and sacrificing for their children. That's the essence of this case. It's not a story to be discussed for fun. Secondly, the red carpet or the gossip means nothing to me. I don't care what people are saying in those places. The only thing that matters to me is how that gossip might affect the people who will be on the jury. That's the only reason. And when you say that public attention is still focused on this case, I have to ask, what are you implying? That the public has such short memories that they forget a serious murder case after only a few days? Do you think I could forget the victims of this case? We, as consumers of information, have a very bad habit. Everything happens too quickly. Phones, social media, the way we consume news today makes the flow of information dizzying. I've covered many big cases, stories that, after a short time, are no longer talked about. I'm not saying that's true. I think it's sad. But I understand how busy people's lives are, with work, family, children, and a host of other responsibilities. Therefore, following a case for an extended period is very difficult. However, this case is different. It still retains attention. People are still talking about it. The media is still following it closely. Perhaps in the wider society, not everyone talks about it every day, but the emotions surrounding this incident remain very strong. I think the reason is its horrific nature. It's truly haunting. When hearing this story, everyone thinks of their own parents. Everyone imagines the moment Romy walked into that room and witnessed the scene she faced. And the most horrifying thing is that she didn't even immediately realize that there were two people lying there motionless, not just one. All these factors combined show why this case needs to be investigated extremely carefully, to be examined to the very end, along with the evidence that is gradually being revealed. And from what I know, there is still a lot of other visual evidence. There are cameras in the hotel. There are cameras in the lobby. There are cameras along the corridors. Those details are still awaiting clarification. Anyone who has ever set foot in a high-end hotel in Los Angeles understands that the security system there is far more extensive than one might imagine. Cameras are everywhere, and therefore, much more evidence will come to light. Around mid-afternoon that day, officers from the Los Angeles Police Department, in coordination with the Los Angeles City Fire Department, arrived at a house on Chateron Street in the Brentwood neighborhood. Upon arriving at the scene, they determined that two people were deceased inside the house. Authorities worked through the night with the medical examiner's office and later officially confirmed the identities of the two victims as Rob and Michelle Reiner. Police stated that when called to the house in West Los Angeles, they found a man and a woman dead in the bedroom. The scene indicated a high degree of violence. There were multiple stab wounds as both were lying in bed. Evidence suggests they resisted, that they were aware of what was happening to them. Blood was everywhere, creating a truly haunting scene. It was a real tragedy, and those who knew them described the two victims as kind and admirable people. The suspect was subsequently arrested in a public area near Exhibition Park, not far from the University of Southern California campus. When officers approached, he did not resist, did not attempt to flee, and did not exhibit any dangerous behavior. The arrest was orderly, and he was quickly taken to the police station for questioning. At the time the program aired, it was confirmed that Nick Reiner was being held on charges of murdering his father, Rob Reiner, and his mother, Michelle Singer Reiner. According to what was revealed, Nick believed he was the victim of a conspiracy. He claimed his detention was unjust and believed some force was orchestrating everything against him. Alongside the investigation, a controversial argument began to emerge, particularly in the context of Hollywood. Some suggested that an obsession with appearance, specifically the fear of weight gain in the entertainment industry, somehow contributed to this tragedy. While this may sound unbelievable, it's being considered by some. Some experts and observers argue that this argument revolves around Nick Reiner gaining weight while taking medication. Prescription drugs, especially antipsychotics, often come with the side effect of weight gain. In an environment like Hollywood, where appearance is scrutinized intensely, even a few pounds can become a major source of stress. According to this theory, Nick's medication was altered due to concerns about his weight, and that change, they argue, may have pushed him into a state of severe psychosis. The question is, Did everything that happened stem from fear of weight gain, anxiety about his appearance, and adjustments to his medication? That's what some are trying to assert. The fact that Nick Reiner had complained about weight gain due to his antipsychotic medication is now being brought up as part of the complex picture of the case. This is actually not uncommon, Nancy. Many people who take these medications experience similar symptoms because they directly affect brain chemistry. The result is a significant increase in appetite, especially for fatty and sugary foods, while the ability to recognize satiety is severely impaired. That's why so many patients overeat while taking antipsychotics. According to what has been said, Nick Reiner sought medical attention because he was worried about his rapid weight gain. And looking back, that seems plausible. There are old videos he uploaded to YouTube when he was very young, in his early 20s. Compared to now, the changes in his appearance are quite noticeable. Nick is now in his 30s, and weight gain over time, especially under the influence of medication, is visibly significant. His doctor reportedly acknowledged this as a legitimate concern and suggested adjusting the medication to find an alternative that might reduce side effects. According to sources, this change triggered a chain reaction leading to his mental breakdown. The new medication didn't seem to provide the same mental stability as the old medication Nick had used for years. He abandoned his familiar treatment regimen, hoping only to control his weight. However, upon hearing these arguments, a crucial question immediately arises. Where did this information come from? The reality is that the only people who could possibly know the details of the treatment, medication changes, or doctors' communications are almost exclusively the defense. Therefore, even those presenting this argument must acknowledge that these are merely statements from sources without any independent verification. The source of the information was not disclosed, making the entire story more suspicious and speculative than factual. Then, the story was taken even further, to the point of sounding almost absurd, that all this tragedy stemmed from no one wanting Nick to gain weight, that the fear of gaining a few pounds led to a change in medication, and from there, an uncontrollable psychotic episode. At first glance, that sounds unbelievable, even ridiculous. Looking back at Nick Reiner's life over the years before, this argument becomes even more tenuous. What is known about him shows that he wasn't a stable person who suddenly collapsed because of weight issues. Nick had been struggling with problems for a very long time. He himself publicly admitted on a podcast that he had a rage and vandalized his parents' guest house. He recounted that the first thing he destroyed was the television, a detail that sent shivers down many spines, as it was a symbol of his family's reputation and legacy. This rage wasn't new. It had been a part of him long before the weight gain story emerged. Therefore, attributing the entire tragedy to an obsession with appearance sounds both far-fetched and misguided. It seems more like a fabricated story designed to mislead public opinion than a serious explanation for what actually happened. And then, while the core questions remained unanswered, the media plunged in. Familiar figures quickly appeared, documentary projects were announced, even before any crucial hearings on the evidence. This led many to question, how did some people seem to know in advance which direction the story would take when the truth was still under investigation? But listen to what Lean said. According to him, from a very early age, Nick was thought to have suffered from schizophrenia. The use of methamphetamine only worsened that condition, ultimately leading to a violent outburst. That's how the incident was portrayed in a media production, where the story was told as if everything was already decided. And this is where the crucial question arises. This entire approach seems to be constructed to serve a defense argument. It's like an attempt to shape how the public, and indeed the jury, perceive the incident. But upon closer examination, the argument returns to the core issue. What was the cause first, and what was the effect later? Did the methamphetamine use trigger the violent psychotic episode? Or did Nick already have a serious mental disorder, and the drug use only exacerbated it? For any jury remaining sane, it would be difficult to accept or overlook a serious crime simply because the perpetrator voluntarily used stimulants. Involuntary intoxication cannot easily become a legal shield for murder. From a professional perspective, Many experts believe the current narrative is too hasty and imprudent. In actual clinical consultations, no one would dare draw definitive conclusions when all the data is incomplete. Simply labeling it as stopping medication leads to violence is a dangerous oversimplification. Severe psychological breakdowns rarely have a single cause. They are often the result of multiple overlapping factors: underlying conditions, substance abuse, medication changes, living environment, and prolonged psychological stress. The story revolving around weight gain, from a medical standpoint, is even less convincing. In practice, when patients complain about weight gain as a side effect of psychotropic medication, doctors often have many other options before considering a complete change in treatment regimen. Weight management medications already exist and are widely used. Therefore, a sudden change in antipsychotic medication usually only occurs when there are signs of serious instability, not simply due to concerns about a few pounds. Another hypothesis is that Nick may have relapsed, returning to drug use, and this is what makes the medication less effective. In that case, doctors are forced to adjust treatment, and things start to spiral out of control. If so, the problem isn't about body image issues, but about the familiar cycle of addiction and mental breakdown. In rehabilitation and therapy programs, one thing is always emphasized: when you start using drugs or alcohol again, think about the consequences. Every choice carries risks, and those risks can be catastrophic. Even those who commented on the documentary, while tending toward defense, acknowledged that the reason given for the medication change was Nick's dissatisfaction with his weight. But emphasizing that detail in the context of a serious crime distorts and misleads the narrative. Ultimately, what remains is not a clear explanation, but a series of unanswered questions. How much of what is being circulated is verified truth, and how much is simply a one-sided account? As pieces continue to be released to the public, the line between information, speculation, and manipulation of public opinion becomes increasingly blurred. We will continue to delve deeper into these investigations with exclusive interviews, listening to the voices of crime victims, families seeking justice, and investigators, experts, and direct sources involved in the cases. Join us to follow the biggest cases across America, with real-time analysis and crime stories dissected to the very core. Crime Stories with Nancy Grace premieres on Fox 1. We hope to see you there. And thank you. Rob Reiner, a Hollywood icon, and his wife, Michelle, passed away in a tragedy no one can accept. They didn't deserve this. They dedicated their lives to loving, protecting, and doing everything they could for their son. Nick grew up spoiled, with every privilege many could only dream of, and his parents did everything they could to help him overcome his problems. Tonight, Nick Reiner is behind bars. Yet, as far as we know, he still believes he deserves to go home, that he is the victim in this whole affair. What is his life like in prison? From Los Angeles, Alexis Tjuk, investigative reporter for Crime Stories, has been closely following the situation and providing the latest information. According to Alexis, Nick is in complete solitary confinement, with no contact with other prisoners, for his own safety. Although no longer under strict suicide monitoring, he is still checked on every 15 minutes. Nick's daily life is almost entirely monotonous. Breakfast is delivered around dawn, lunch is cold in the late morning, and dinner is a hot meal in the evening. Besides that, there is virtually no other activity. He spends up to 23 hours a day in his cell, only going outside for very limited periods. When asked directly whether his current life was significantly different from before his arrest, the answer left many pondering. Previously, Nick lived in his parents' multi-million-dollar mansion in Brentwood, one of California's wealthiest and most prestigious areas. However, the reality was that he had no stable job, no volunteer activities, and virtually no specific responsibilities in his daily life. According to what has been revealed, Nick appeared in a film nearly a decade ago, but since then has had no clear career path. He spends most of his time on podcasts talking about his life. His parents, so worried about their son's mental health, even hesitated to leave him home alone on important occasions. At one point, they had to rely on close friends just to arrange for him to attend a family gathering. This shows that, even before the tragedy occurred, Nick's life was full of instability and dependence, in a way that sends chills down many people's spines when they look back at the whole story today. Joining me now is Dr. Dwayne Hendris, a former MDC Brooklyn prison guard, former prison guard at Sheridan, Oregon, and former senior prison guard for the U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He is also the founder and president of a new organization and the author of the book, Who Are You? See, Speak, and Be Seen. Dr. Hendris, thank you for being here. To clarify one thing, basically, Nick Reiner has a place to sleep and is provided with 3 meals a day. In other words, he has food and shelter, the minimum necessities. Alexis Tchuk emphasized that 2 of those meals were cold. But in reality, cold here could simply be cereal, fruit, and juice for breakfast, and a sandwich and chips for lunch. That doesn't mean he's being mistreated or in harsh conditions. There's still a hot meal in the evening. Furthermore, he has virtually no restrictions on seeing a lawyer, access to the library, and the right to see a spiritual counselor if he wishes. Family visits are possible, although it's highly unlikely given he's accused of murdering his own parents. Describing the situation as hell on earth clearly doesn't reflect reality. Look at history. Many famous people have been incarcerated in similar facilities and survived. There are names that have been in that same detention system and are still alive and well. So the question is, how bad are the conditions there really? According to Dr. Hendris, in many respects, it's even better than some other prisons, including the Los Angeles County Jail. Many reports even suggest the menu is quite decent. Another noteworthy point is that this facility has a team of resident psychiatrists and mental health professionals, something not every facility has. Many other federal prisons typically only have psychologists or specialists assigned on an hourly basis. Maintaining a dedicated team shows a greater focus on mental health care. This places this detention facility in a different league compared to other places like Rikers Island or MDC Brooklyn. Therefore, saying that breakfast and lunch are cold doesn't mean mistreatment. Cereal, milk, juice, fruit, sandwiches, these are perfectly acceptable meals. According to national standards, detainees must be provided with at least 1 hot meal at a time, and in this case, that standard is met. Nick Reiner is currently in solitary confinement, most likely in a mental health unit, where he has no cellmate and limited contact with other inmates. Whenever he goes out to shower, make phone calls, or participate in permitted activities, his movements are closely monitored by staff. He almost certainly has no social interaction with other detainees. Overall, this is not a pleasant environment, but it is not as bleak as some have portrayed it. So, Dr. Dwayne Hendris, how is the psychiatric treatment area in prison different from, and how is it more pleasant than, a regular detention facility? He argues that the prison environment itself, regardless of the type, can have negative mental effects. Isolation, stress, and a loss of control over one's life can easily lead to feelings of frustration and loneliness. But that doesn't necessarily mean everyone suffers from a serious mental disorder. The key point here is that Nick Reiner's absence from group detention, given his current mental health, actually benefits both the defense and the prosecution. His records will play a crucial role, from the medications he's taking, the psychological assessments he's undergone, to decisions to place him on suicide watch and then remove it. According to procedure, every new inmate undergoes a comprehensive health examination and psychiatric evaluation within the first 96 hours. All of these documents will become crucial evidence, especially since his personal responsibility for the alleged acts will undoubtedly be the focus of debate. Currently, Nick Reiner is being held in a psychiatric treatment facility, with a private room and meals delivered to him. Food trays are brought to his room, allowing him ample time to eat at a relatively leisurely pace, after which staff return to collect them. In other words, he is in a secluded space, with less pressure and conflict than in a general detention area. Some even consider this room service, although it is, of course, still within the prison framework. The prison menu, according to what has been published, is far from meager. Breakfast includes cereal, bread, pastries, milk, coffee, fruit, and juice. Lunch and dinner consist of items such as sandwiches, chicken, vegetarian patties, tacos, lasagna, fish cakes, served with potatoes or fries. There are also meals specifically for those with special dietary needs. Therefore, the information that he only ate bread and drank water clearly doesn't reflect reality. In fact, the food conditions here are considered quite good compared to the general standards of many other detention facilities. However, things need to be put into context. This is someone who was once accustomed to a life of luxury, with expensive meals and almost absolute pampering. Compared to that past, any prison environment is a huge shock. Does anyone feel sorry for him? For many, the answer is no. But it's also hard to deny that his life has completely changed, from a luxurious villa, private pool, tens of thousands of dollars in monthly allowances, cars, and all living expenses covered, to a small cell under constant surveillance. That difference is not only logical, but inevitable. It forced him to confront a reality he had never faced before. And it is this very contrast that makes many feel regret for a life that once had everything in its hands, but then lost it all with its own hands. In previous accounts, he had described fits of rage, loss of control, sleepless nights, and destructive acts of vandalism. But now, in public, he doesn't cry, doesn't show grief. His face is quite calm, his head shaved, a cold, empty image, as if all emotions have been suppressed behind bars. Now, he has some awareness of what he has done. A disturbed individual, repeatedly spiraling into addiction, consistently refusing treatment despite years of repeated visits to rehabilitation centers. Joining us is Dr. Kendall Crowns, Chief Medical Examiner of Tarrant County, Fort Worth, a district never short of serious incidents. He is also a familiar face on the podcast Mayhem in the Morgue and an honorary lecturer at Burnett School of Medicine, TCU. Dr. Crowns, thank you for joining us. Many people believe that victims in cases like this die without knowing it, as the public has heard in other cases. But the reality is often far more brutal. The injuries show that the victim endured a violent and prolonged attack. From a professional perspective, what do those signs reveal about what really happened? Typically, when an autopsy reveals numerous injuries of this type, it almost certainly indicates a deliberate attack. In most cases, the victims are in a state of shock, but they remain conscious in the initial moments. Severe injuries suggest they struggled to survive. Those brief moments are a time of extreme pain and panic, as the body weakens and consciousness fades. Especially in cases involving the use of strong stimulants, we often see a level of violence exceeding normal limits, with repeated acts even when the victim is no longer able to resist. This reflects a severe loss of control on the part of the perpetrator at the time of the crime. Next, we connected with Josh Crew, a veteran defense attorney from Phoenix. From a legal perspective, what do you think investigators can gather from the hotel room where the suspect stayed? How might physical evidence play a role in the defense or prosecution strategy? Would the discovery of traces of drug use weaken the argument that he was not in control of his actions? According to Crew, the seized physical evidence will be extremely important. First, it can help determine whether the suspect used drugs. Biological samples collected can indicate what substances were in the body and at what levels, although it cannot pinpoint the exact time of use. In addition, indirect evidence, such as personal belongings, luggage, or what remains in the room, will help reconstruct the overall picture of the suspect's behavior and state before, during, and after the incident. Investigators will also consider the testimony of indirect witnesses, hotel staff who brought him to the location, or anyone who had contact during the relevant time period. Every small detail can become a crucial piece of the puzzle, from clothing and personal belongings to signs of activity in the room. Even the suspect's previous movements could lead to other key evidence. This is a complex investigation, unfolding in many parallel lines, as both the prosecution and the defense are diligently building their arguments. If you have any information related to this case, or believe you can help shed light on the truth, please contact the hotline provided. Every piece of information can make a difference. We also take a moment to remember a man who fell while on duty protecting the community, a son, a colleague, and a hero in the eyes of many. His sacrifice reminds us of the price of justice and the responsibility that law enforcement officers bear every day. We sincerely thank our guests for participating in today's program and sharing their important perspectives. We will continue to closely follow and update you on the latest developments of the case in the following episodes. Thank you to all our viewers for taking the time to watch this video on YouTube. If you find the content valuable, please don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the latest analysis and updates. Until we meet again, we wish you a peaceful evening. Please continue to join us on our journey to seek truth, justice, and speak up for the families still waiting for answers to these unsolved cases.